Okay, so another weekend of college football, another live stream in which we have got a lot to talk about. Not only the wild weekend of football we just had, but also the newest AP ranks, because there continues to be shakeup as this college football season has continued to just be a work of art in as far as what's going to happen next is concerned. There's a whole lot for us to get into, especially considering what week we're going into, the games that we have coming up. But as always, I want to talk about the games that just happened. We'll preview the games coming up. But for the most part, let's talk about the weekend we just saw and the newest AP ranks. And we'll start with the newest installment of the AP. The newest installment of the AP contains some shakeup, which, look, we've been used to seeing that this year and this season. That has been the name of the game for this college football season, so it's no surprise we continue seeing that in the AP ranks. However, for this installment of the AP ranks, 1 and 2 makes a lot of sense. Alabama, Georgia, and for the most part, to this point of the season, Alabama and Georgia have absolutely separated themselves from the competition. Alabama and Georgia right now look like the best two teams in the nation, and they seem to be on a collision course to play each other. That's going to be an incredible game. Hopefully, that's the game we get to see. Georgia really doesn't have too much opposition left. Alabama is taking on Texas A&M this weekend. Texas A&M has no semblance of an offense to the early portions of this season, though they do have a good defense. So when you look at how the schedule aligns, it looks like it's all just already decided that we're going to get Alabama, Georgia, in the SEC championship. So 1 and 2 make a whole lot of sense to me. Those are the two best teams in college football, and I don't think it's particularly close. Like, if you have what you believe as a legitimate argument that Alabama and Georgia are not 1 and 2, please let me know. We can talk about it. I just don't think that there's a real legitimate argument that would leave those two out, and we're going to talk about their respective games. Outside of that, you have Iowa, Penn State, then Cincinnati, Oklahoma, Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, BYU. So when it comes to Oregon, Penn State, Cincinnati, for those of you that have been around the channel, I actually had kind of posed the question a few weeks ago if Iowa could be ranked ahead of Oregon. Now, ultimately, I even conceded. I thought that the Oregon win at Ohio State gave them the nod to go over Iowa. But as time went on, that Ohio State win, though still a good win, there's nobody that can take that away from the Ducks. It's beginning to look not as solid as many people anticipated that it would be. Then you look at Iowa, and all Iowa's continued to do is impress. I mean, they are playing high-level football, and they dismantled Maryland. Maryland was riding really high going into that game. Tualia Tagovailoa has been having a sensational season. Mike Locksley has them looking really solid. If you keep up with recruiting, I mean, they have done well on the recruiting trail. They got the #1 wide receiver a few years ago. They flipped him from LSU. So there's a lot to be excited about at Maryland. Iowa straight up dismantled them. I mean, they took it to them. That's a good football team. Penn State coming in after. So the Big Ten right now is a really solid league from top to bottom. If you're looking at the internal competition and how it relates to each other, that's going to be a very exciting league to watch going forward, because you look at the AP rankings and there's a lot for each team to gain. I mean, just looking at the Big Ten, you have Penn State, you got Iowa, you got Michigan, you got Ohio State, Michigan State sitting at 11. You have all of these opportunities for these teams to get ranked wins under their belt. Said this game was not as close as it looks. Are you talking about the K-State Oklahoma game? Sooner updates? Let me know if that's what you're talking about, because we're going to get into that. I have a bit to talk about there. Oklahoma, yeah, you're talking about the Oklahoma game. Yeah, we're going to get into that here in a bit. When we get to that number 8, we'll talk about the Oklahoma-Kansas State game, because I don't disagree. I don't disagree at all that the offense looked better. The offensive line still needs a lot of work. There's no way to not say that. If you look at the left side of Oklahoma's offensive line right now, it is just, it's having problems. And at the center position as well. And it really begs the question to me, what's going on with this dichotomy of Rame and Kongal, right? Like one game we're seeing one, the next game we're seeing the other. Neither one of them are really handling the position the way many people wanted them to. But the Oklahoma offense outside the offensive line actually looked better this week than I think they've looked previously. Spencer had himself a good game. The wide receivers had a good game. The running game looked solid. But Oklahoma's offensive line needs to come together. But I don't disagree. Said garbage time TDs. that gave them a chance to win at the end isn't a thing. Which game are you referring to right there, Frightening? Let me know down in the comments. We'll talk about that as well. But if you look at the Big Ten, like I said, you got all these teams, right? If you are a Big Ten team, if you're Ohio State even, right? Like I think that Ohio State is still a bit overrated right now, being a top 10 team. I think that they've really struggled. But let's say you are an Ohio State fan. You look at the rest of the Big Ten, you have ranked teams ahead of you. You can really play yourself back into interesting position depending on what happens with the rest of college football. And if you look at the rest of college football right now, it's going to shake up in some interesting ways. Do I think that Ohio State will make their way back in it? It's probably unlikely, but they do have ranked teams ahead of them that they can play to get some really good wins on their belt. Ryan says, OU DBs can't cover or make plays. They're the definition of bend, but don't break. Yeah, right now, Oklahoma's defense is interesting because you look at some of the DB positions and you'll look at it and you'll say, okay, right now, from one play, these DBs are playing really high level. The next play, it's just not there, right? And even though the DBs are a concerning unit, I also look at that middle linebacking unit. It's a unit that has to come together as well. I think that they did much better, but it still needs to come with improvement. Luckily for OU, that defensive front is really solid. I mean, that defensive front is really solid. Nick Bonito has been outstanding this year. Seriously, outstanding. If you want to go back, go watch that Nebraska game and just focus in on number 11. I don't care who you root for. You'll have fun. I mean, he had a really solid game. He's a really talented player. He is as highly touted as they say he is. I mean, he's really good. He's really good. What's up, Cameron? Thanks for coming in. Always good to hear from you, man. Hope you're having a good day. Frightening says, Oklahoma fans claiming the TD at the end was in garbage time, but they had a chance to onside it with 120 left. That's not garbage time, TD. No, and look, to be fair, Frightening, I haven't seen too many Oklahoma fans say that it was garbage time. I've seen a lot of Oklahoma fans point to the areas in which they thought they did good. They thought Spencer played a better game. I thought Spencer played a better game. They thought that the offense looked better. I did as well. But the main complaint I've seen from Oklahoma fans is that the offensive line just still isn't coming together, and that's valid. But I haven't seen too many fans, to their credit, just be like, that game means nothing because garbage time. What confused me is how our defense played worse against K-State than they did against West Virginia. Here's the thing, Sooner Updates. You need to look at something I said, right? So before I ever got into doing YouTube or any of this right here, my background in sports was, I had a lot of football background. Both my roommates in college played college football. One of my best friends from high school played for TCU. Another one of my good friends from high school is currently in the NFL. And we'd all get together, watch football games, break down film. I mean, that's what we did for fun. But growing up, my first sport that I was like enthralled with was boxing. My dad was a boxer in college, so that was very near and dear to my heart. And so sometimes you'll hear me say boxing analogies, and for this one right here, styles make fights. And that certainly applies in football. That absolutely applies in football. Whenever you have a situation to where I've talked about the Oklahoma defense, if you look at what's been giving them trouble, it's anything with pre-snap motion that is really meant to just be eye candy. And when you look at it, right, Tulane did it very well. West Virginia did it very well. Nebraska did it very well. When I did my preview game for the Nebraska, I said, if you're able to do some pre-snap motion, you can get them off balance and you can create holes. When you look at Kansas State and you say, okay, well, why did we have a tougher time defending Kansas State than West Virginia? I think you need to look at the nuances. You kept Deuce Vaughn from running all over you on the ground, but he got open in the passing game. And if you look why, that's the one area I've constantly said that I thought OU has had trouble with this year. They've been getting better, but things out the backfield, tight ends, running backs, and it's not just OU, right? Like, I'm an Alabama fan. That killed us a few years ago. That absolutely killed us a few years ago. If you look at college football, it's the whole reason why we say you want a running back that's active out the backfield. It's awesome to have a running back that is a north-south guy that you can hand it to 35 times a game. That there is still a place for that in college football. A shrinking place, but there is a place for that. but you also need a guy that can get the ball out the backfield. There's absolutely a need for that. What do I think about Christian Harris? The Alabama linebacking core this year, Gelato, we're going to talk about this a bit more in depth. Here in a bit, I'm going to start talking about specific games. We'll get into this a bit more. But just to answer the question, it's been real up and down for the linebacking core. And maybe, I'm not worried by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not worried because you look at the ups they've played with and it's there. Now, there have been downs. Sure, there have absolutely been downs. But I think the reason I'm kind of taking the stance I am is because I'm not sure how much of the downs are self-imposed or how much of the downs are because of something that the other team did. And I'll circle back to Florida. Florida played Alabama really tough, but Florida schemed a great game in that game. Right? Alabama really hurt themselves in a lot of ways in that game, but credit where it's due, right? Let's give credit where it's due. Dan Mullen did a fantastic job scheming that game. He really did, to isolate some things. So it's more of one of those things of how things came to be. You said he only had one tackle last game. Yeah, that's not what you want to see. But then I really need to go back and watch him specifically in that game, because if he only had one tackle, but he was in the right place, just not the guy making the play, that's one thing, right? Because we see so many times that there are guys who make the play without ever making the play. Maybe that's that. I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to really go back and watch him in that game, which I absolutely will do this week. I absolutely will do. I'm doing multiple live streams this week, so we'll talk about that again. Absolutely, we'll talk about that again. So the AP poll, I mean, I said it before a lot of people came in here. I want to say it again, just in case someone has an argument. You know me, I love having these. If you have an argument as to why Alabama and Georgia shouldn't be 1 and 2, please say it. We can talk about it. I just don't see in what world they're not 1 and 2. I think Ohio State is very lucky to be ranked in the top 10. I think Oregon is beyond lucky to be ranked in the top 10. I think Oregon's a good team. But I think that sometimes losses, they matter, right? And it's not the end of the world, but we have to give credit to what has been done, right? And Stanford beat them. You got a lot of teams that are good teams this year, but it's just hard for me to put Oregon in the top 10 right now. It's very hard for me to do that. Michigan 9, BYU 10. Oklahoma State is an interesting one. And with that, I want to talk about the Big 12 right now. And then after the Big 12, we'll get into the SEC and then just anything else after that. We're going to have some fun. But the Big 12 is really interesting right now. Going into the year, I thought that we could see a 3-team race for the Big 12 championship. And that 3-team race was going to revolve around Iowa State, Texas, and Oklahoma, with the most likely winner of that being Oklahoma. Now, when we fast forward to where we currently are, Iowa State is a dumpster fire. I mean, they're not that good this year. I don't know why. They returned a bunch of veteran players, but they are not the team that I thought they would be. And if I was doing a where I was right, where I was wrong, I'll be the first to tell you I was wrong about Iowa State. I didn't think they'd be a playoff team, and I said that all through the offseason. I never thought Iowa State was a playoff team. I didn't think they'd be this bad. I just never saw that happening. In fairness, I'd have to put Clemson. I was wrong there too. Cameron, you're right. It is a long season left to go. It absolutely is. And look, Iowa State does have good coaching, talent on the team, and they could shake some things up. But man, they have not been the team I think myself, many others thought they would be. It's just they're really struggling right now. But then you look on the outside of that, and you have Oklahoma State, who is really playing good football this year. Baylor has been impressive, right? I mean, okay, when I say impressive, I don't mean that they're like a world beater or that they're, going to be in a New Year's 6 or that, nothing like that. When I say impressive, I'm meaning when we look at what this team was relative to where they have gone in this short period of time, they've had some success. I'm very interested in the Dave Aranda project. Dave Aranda coming from LSU was massive to that LSU defense. I really am interested in how Dave Aranda is going to do at Baylor. I mean, my interest is absolutely piqued. They're a team that we have to watch for because they could shake them some things up. Then outside of that, you have Oklahoma State, Texas, and Oklahoma, all really in a good position right now to make a push for the Big 12 championship. The interesting thing about it is Texas right now only has the one loss to Arkansas. They're going to play Oklahoma this week, giving either team their first loss in the Big 12. So out of this week, one of those teams is going to sustain their first Big 12 loss, putting them down a peg. However, when you look at the schedules, how they both shake up, both Oklahoma and Texas still have to play Oklahoma State. They still have to play Baylor. There's still a lot of football left to be played. So we could actually see the Big 12 championship preview this weekend with Oklahoma, Texas. Hop down to the comments. Who do y'all think is going to be in the Big 12 championship? Because right now, it just seems like Texas has gotten better, right? They've been getting better from week to week. Casey really has this offense going, frightening. Shout out to you. You called it. You've been saying it. You know that I thought it'd be Hudson. You know why I thought it'd be Hudson, and I was wrong there. Look, I'm not backing off that I don't think that Hudson isn't a solid quarterback and that he can grow into a solid quarterback and that he's going to be very good one day. I'm still 100% on that. I am, right? But you were right. In the current capacity, Casey, the offense just looks better. So the Big 12 right now is incredibly interesting. And when we look at the games that just happened this weekend, it was even more interesting where we had Oklahoma taking on the team that has given them trouble and Texas taking on a team that has given them trouble. Both teams coming out of there with a win. Both of those games I thought were very impactful for where each team was in the season. Texas, there was the questions of, okay, well, now that you have KC, the offense is humming, but you know, how far along are we? Now you go up against TCU. We know what Gary Patterson is schematically. I have a little bit of a soft spot for TCU and Gary Patterson. I will get that bias out the way right now. That I have a bias for them because one of my best friends played for TCU. He was a safety for TCU, Denzel Johnson. If y'all remember years back when TCU had that unbelievable game against Oregon where it went into like quadruple overtime, Denzel was the safety that dove and swatted the ball down to secure the win for TCU. I mean, he was a high-level football player, brilliant. And so, you know, he's walked me through a lot of TCU schematics. So I have a ton of respect for Gary Patterson, for the defense ran. I just have a ton of respect for it. So I was impressed seeing what Texas did against the Gary Patterson defense. Granted, we saw Gary Patterson's defense get gashed the week before by SMU, but still, chicken, no. No, we cannot trade running backs. No, absolutely not. We need our running backs right now, especially with the injury to Jace, man. We need him. Good try, but no. So yeah, you know, as we're talking about this, everybody, I'm sorry to click through these so fast. Everybody's saying Oklahoma, Texas. I agree. I think that's probably where we're going. It's going to be very interesting as to how we get there. I'm piqued with this Oklahoma State game because I don't know who Oklahoma State is right now. And that's a whole other conversation for a whole other time. I mean, I'm having a lot of trouble figuring out exactly who they are. I think I know, but it's just kind of hard to gauge right now. But this weekend, when we look at this game, it's going to tell a lot. But we talked about the Texas TCU game. Now you flip it over and you look at Oklahoma against Kansas State. This was big for a few reasons, right? First and foremost, Oklahoma's first real road game of this season. And I get it. The players said that they like being on the road more. I think that there can be something to that. But it's one thing to say like, hey, we want to be on the road. It's another thing to go out there and do it. And they did it. The game was close, but it wasn't, right? It wasn't. I thought that Oklahoma played a very good game up until they didn't. And I'm not saying that I ever thought Oklahoma looked bad in that game, but Oklahoma's offensive line continues to give them more problems than they should have. And look, Kansas State with Deuce Vaughn, you can really scheme that young man into something ferocious. He is so talented. I mean, so talented. I love watching Deuce Vaughn play. There's no doubt, though, that Oklahoma is still trying to get to the team that many of us expected them to be, to where they should be, and it all revolves around that offensive line. But that's exactly why I think that it was massively important for both institutions to play the teams they played going into this week. Why I say that is because Gary Patterson and them, Gary Patterson is a defensive guy. We know what he does, but then they have Zach Evans. Zach Evans is having a great year. So Texas got to experience that. Sark got to take on Gary Patterson. He took him down. The Texas defense was managing to stop Zach Evans, very talented. So that's great experience. Then you look on the flip side. Oklahoma had to play Kansas State. Kansas State has been phenomenal running the football. Oklahoma pretty much well nullified their running game. That's going to be great practice for what Texas is going to do. Now, Casey is healthy, and that health is going to be big. Skylar Thompson, I don't know how healthy he was that week. I'm not going to even guess to assign percentages. I'll let y'all do that. But, going up against Casey with his mobility is going to be different with him being fully healthy. But you did get to practice against a running back that can be schemed in multiple areas and how to hurt you. So having that look going against Texas is going to be big. Now, that being said, there's a world of difference between Bijan and Deuce Vaughn. I think Deuce is incredible, but Bijan, there's really not much that young man can't do. Let's be 100% honest here. And for those of you that remember, I was irate whenever it came out that he was left out of the Pro Football Focus's top 50 college football players. I did not see what universe there were 50 football players that didn't include Bijan Robinson. He's got the ability. He's got the ability to do anything. When you look at Bijan, he's got the speed. He's got power. He's got balance. He's got vision. He's got the cutting ability. He is really a jack of all trades. He's active, catching. I mean, his upside is crazy. His upside is really, really crazy. And when you look at that, remember what I said earlier in this. Styles make fights. Styles make matchups. So now we have Texas, whose offense is really humming, going up against Oklahoma, whose defense this year has looked better. Kansas State gave them some problems, but the only reason why I'm really not sitting here talking about Kansas State and Oklahoma and what Kansas State was really able to do to Oklahoma's defense is because Kansas State has given Oklahoma trouble. They just have your number, right? They don't fear you. They think they can play with you, and they can. They've proved it. And good for them, but that happens. So it's kind of hard for me to gauge, like, okay, is this just a game where the defense isn't doing what they should, or is just this one of the games where a team has that team's number? It's very hard for me to gauge. We'll get a really, really good indication of where that defense is against Texas. Likewise, it's just going to be great. Zach says that the D-line gets too far spread on rushing Robinson. Yeah, you got to be very disciplined in how you go about defending Texas, especially when you look at Sark, right? And I kind of have a little bit of an insight into Steve Sarkisian, being an Alabama fan, watching all that he did at Alabama. He loves pre-snap motion. I love pre-snap motion. And when you look at the weapons they have, Xavier Worthy, he needs to catch the football with a bit more consistency. But he's a young guy, right? He's just a freshman. So there's a lot for him to improve on, but he's really affecting the game. Whittington, Texas's offense has got a ways and a few different people to really affect some change in this game. Oklahoma's defense, you got Benito, you got Billy Bowman at the nickel. He is making some really good plays for a young guy. I think he's really showing that his time's going to go on. He's going to be a really solid addition to that secondary. But this is just going to be a fantastic game. And, it's one of those games where I'm looking forward to talking to some people and putting a video together about it. But we know what this game is. I could spend all day long talking about it, and then nothing happened that I think it should happen because it's this rivalry game. That's just the way this goes. Says OU and Texas, but I wouldn't be surprised if Oklahoma State stayed undefeated until that Oklahoma game. Could be a sleeper pick. I actually agree. I do. Now, I agree on all counts. I agree that right now, if I had to say anything, I think that OU and Texas are probably in the lead for playing in the Big 12 championship, but I completely agree that Oklahoma State is one that is incredibly interesting, and I'm very interested to see them continue throughout the season because I'm not completely sure I know who they are. I'm not completely sure I know who they are. Zach says, not Zach. Frightening says, bro, he went under a deal and like a bridge. Yeah. I mean, you got to be so disciplined when you're going up against an offense. So the reason why y'all hear me talk about discipline, and you might sit there and think, hey, why is he? I mean, naturally, discipline. This is football. Because when you're going up against an offense that likes to move people around the way that Steve Sarkisian has in the past, you cannot mess up. If you mess up, you're going to turn around as a middle linebacker thinking that you were supposed to cover a running back, look behind you, and there's going to be a tight end streaking down the field, and it's done. It's a touchdown. I mean, that's just the way it's played now. It's just the way it's played. He said, frightening, I'm not forgetting about Keelan Robinson. I'm not forgetting about Key Robinson. Coming from Alabama, he's a really talented player. And the thing that we need to remember about Keelan Robinson is Nick Saban was trying him out in the slot just to try and figure out how to get him on the ball, right? However we could get him the ball, that's what we were trying to do. He's got a lot of ability. He has got a lot of ability. Mike asks, does Texas have the front seven to rattle Rattler? I think so. But that's going to be really interesting to see, right? Like, Texas has some guys along that defensive front, but likewise, so does Oklahoma. If I'm really looking at this from the line of scrimmage battle, I think that both teams have a way to affect the quarterback. And that's why I just think that, aside from the rivalry, it's always such a great game because of the rivalry implications. The stylistic way this game could go down makes it all the more fun when you just look at some of these little nuances, right? You look at some of the guys Texas has on that defense. I love Ojimo. I always mess up his name. That guy's so much fun to watch. Texas has some dudes, and the Texas secondary is going to be big, making sure that Oklahoma's wide receivers don't spring open. But likewise, Oklahoma has got a lot on that defensive front as well. A lot. Chris says Kansas is going to win it all. Hey, that would be a wild time to be alive. That would be a wild time to be alive. Yeah, Frightening puts it really well. I agree with what he says here. He says, we do, but Rattler is a quick release. We'll see what happens. Ojimo and Agofu are nasty. Completely agree. Ojimo, Agofu, tons of fun to watch. Both very talented. Rattler has got a quick release, a lightning quick release. He can get the ball out really quick. And if you're Oklahoma, that might be the thing to do it. Soften them up on the back end. Make them respect that quick release and then hit them over top. Buy you some time. There's a lot of different ways this game could go down, which makes it all the more entertaining. But now, with that being talked about, I want to bounce over to the SEC because there's a lot of interesting things happening in the SEC right now, right? There's a whole lot interesting happening in the SEC right now. And one of the things, Live Life says Oklahoma has a lot of wide receiver threats, but you wouldn't know it. It was really interesting. Last year, I was reading this article, and it was talking about how Oklahoma has got a lot of talented wide receivers. They got all of these unbelievable playmakers, but they weren't ever getting the separation that many people thought they should. If you actually looked, talent-wise, they're an upper-tier wide receiver room. Separation-wise, they were dead in the middle of the pack in college football, like the 50th percentile mark at wide receivers being able to gain separation, which is wild when you think about some of the speed they have at wide receiver. You just wouldn't think that would be what it is, right? You just wouldn't think. Joel says conference winners only should be college football playoffs. I hear you on this, but this is where I disagree. Let's say we play out this entire season and Clemson wins the ACC. We go into the SEC, Alabama and Georgia play. And just because I'm an Alabama fan, I'm going to pose this scenario. Alabama ends up beating Georgia in the SEC championship. Georgia now has one loss on the season to the number 1 ranked team in the nation. Are we really to believe that Clemson is deserving of a spot over Georgia? Because I get it. That is the easy way to do it. Conference only. We think that's great. But we have to remember, we have the same complaint in the NFL right now. That's the biggest complaint people have about the NFL playoff structure, is that you'll have a team that can walk into the playoffs with a losing record. Meanwhile, a division that's really good gets left out. So I don't know that the best answer is to automatically say that unless we have an expanded college football playoff. If we expand the college football playoff and then we're saying, hey, all conference winners, you're in, and then there will be teams at the back end of that, I can get behind that. But in the current structure of a 4-team playoff, I have a really hard time getting behind the argument of conference winners only should be in the college football playoffs, as valid as it is. And it is a very valid point. I get why there's the line of thinking, because you just won a conference. That isn't meaningless. But I also don't think that all the conferences are created equal. And I think that example I gave that Alabama and Georgia really exemplifies what I'm talking about. That in that situation, Clemson could win the ACC, and if Georgia gets beat by Alabama in the SEC championship game, they beat Clemson. And now they're not getting a playoff spot because they have one loss to the number 1 team in the nation. It'd be very hard for me not to argue in that situation that Georgia isn't a playoff team. That's just my opinion. I could be 100% wrong on that. Very interested in hearing for y'all. But, it's just in the current capacity of 4 teams, I think that the best 4 are more enticing than just conference winners because we have 5 conferences. We have to keep us some integrity. I did see that out the corner of my eye, frightening. We all need some integrity. Integrity Farms. Best place around. Keeping us some integrity. But that's why, because when we only have 4 spots for a college football playoff and 5 Power 5 conferences, how are we to decide which conference is left out? That just kind of creates a slippery slope. Is Kentucky for real? They look pretty real right now. I mean, look, I think that we need to modify. This is something that y'all might have noticed I do, and it's because of my background in law. I like to define things a lot because I think that it puts us all on an even keel and an even understanding of expectations. So when we say, is Kentucky for real? I think they're for real, as in they're a much improved team. They're a fun team. They're a good football team. But if we're asking, is Kentucky for real in the sense of, is Kentucky going to make the college football playoffs? No, I can't see that happening. It's just not, they're not there yet. But they are real in the sense that they're getting better. They've gotten some great wins. Got one this weekend. There's a lot of interesting things happening in the SEC. Chicken says I did not agree with it. The best should play last year, Oklahoma. We did not deserve it. And look, I agree. I do. Right. And Chicken, I thought Oklahoma finished the year really well. I did. But there's just no way. No. No. For those of you not, understanding what Chicken and I are talking about right now, Chicken has been on my case trying to get a running back from Alabama to go to Oklahoma, and I have been adamantly just denying. No. We need our running backs. So no, I'm sorry. Y'all have KB, you have Gray. No, we need our running backs. They're better. They'd get smashed by UGA or Bama. And that's why I say I want to define things such as like real, because I think they're a real team. They're good. But just because you're a good football team, or just because I even say you're a great football team, that doesn't mean that you're up there with Alabama, with Georgia, with those other teams, because there are levels to this. There are levels to this game. And right now, Kentucky is absolutely improving, but they're not on that same level. We're going to talk about Cincinnati here in a bit, Isaiah. We'll talk about that here in a bit. I do want to talk about some things with the SEC. Sooner I'll give my playoff prediction. Remind me of that here in a bit, because I have some things in my mind with the SEC right now that I want to talk about. And one of them is something that Frightening brought up. Because when I say there are some interesting things happening in the SEC right now, there are going to be some coaching vacancies at the end of this season. There are. And one of them, in my opinion, might be at a premier institution in LSU. When we look at the coaching vacancies around the college football, I should have said there will be coaching vacancies around college football. I think there'll be some in the SEC. Manny Diaz, I think he's done at Miami. They're not good. It's almost comical how bad of positions they put themselves in. It is almost comical. It's unbelievable what they do half the time with the players they have. And then you look at LSU. And LSU is in a really precarious situation because when you look at Coach O, right now, I think that it's getting harder and harder as the days go on to not subscribe to the argument that Coach O hit the perfect situation when he won the national championship. You had Joe Brady come in that people around the NFL had always been saying like, hey, this guy, that's a guy you need to keep your eye on. He is a brilliant mind. So you have him. You have your defense unbelievable defense. We know what LSU's done in the past. Dave Aranda's there. They've just culminated into a defensive powerhouse. That's what they've been since I was little, right? Like we know what LSU is defensively. So you have that. Then you have the perfect storm of all the talent on the team, Joe Burrow coming in, and you end up winning a national championship. And a lot of people thought that that was going to translate into sustained success. And it's this fallacy that many people have brought into because of how unreal what Nick Saban in Alabama has done. Success is not as linear as Alabama and Nick Saban make it look. Just because you've won it doesn't mean that it's automatically going to come, and especially when you have to replace a lot. But in fairness, last season, if you were an LSU fan and you were to tell me, well, Ty, we lost a lot of talent to the NFL after our national championship season, and then COVID happened, and it really affected us. I would point out that there are a lot of teams that were affected by COVID, i.e. everybody, but it at least is an argument that there is some logic placed in it, right? I don't know. Maybe you did have a real struggle with COVID in your locker room. Maybe that is the truth. That's not my place to say that it isn't. So it was very hard for me to really argue that, oh, well, anybody who was bad last year, if they want to say that it was because of COVID, I can subscribe to that so long as we're also subscribing to the notion of the teams that were good last year. It's very impressive that they were good because of COVID, because those are two ideologies that must exist in the same world. If we are giving passes for teams not being good during COVID, we have to give even more praise for the teams that were able to keep focus and have a stellar season through COVID, no matter how you finished. But now you fast forward into this year. And what has LSU done? You look at it and they got beat by UCLA and we thought, okay, well, it'll get better maybe. You got beat by Auburn. Auburn's looked decent at portions of this season, but they have a quarterback competition going on. I mean, when you look at LSU, there is absolutely no excuse for what's happening now. They recruit as well as anybody in the nation. They're always a top 10 recruiting class. And here is my ultimate fear for LSU. My biggest fear, if I was an LSU fan, is that Coach O is just a rah-rah guy. And I think that we're starting to see Coach O is a rah-rah guy. I'm not discounting his X's and O's and his scheme ability, but if we look, Coach O is a trenches guy. He's supposed to be a dude that is proficient in how to coach the trenches, and LSU is getting spanked in the trenches. UCLA ran all over them. When was the last time you thought of a Pac-12 team dominating the line of scrimmage against an LSU? Even me, right? Like that thought seems foreign when you look at just the recruiting. And that's not a shot at UCLA. That's not a shot at UCLA. UCLA is really playing good football right now, and I'm not trying to diminish what they do. But just look at the recruiting difference along the line of scrimmage. Just entertain me there. If you get free time, just simply look at the line of scrimmage recruiting between LSU and UCLA, and they are not the same. They're not. And so now the question must be asked. If you're a trenches guy and you're getting spanked in the trenches, what are you doing? What do you offer? And I think when we look at the totality of the situation surrounding LSU, and this will be where I leave this before we move on to the next point, if you look at the totality of circumstances, surrounding LSU, let's try that one more time. If you look at the totality of wow. Hey, this is what happens when you do this live, right? You get tongue-tied. If you look at the totality of circumstances surrounding LSU right now, you're getting beat in the line of scrimmage. You had a head coach that really kind of tried to convince everybody in the nation that the national championship was more on him than anybody else. He tried to say that Dave Aranda wasn't important to the team and that Joe Brady wasn't that big of a deal because Scott Linehan called all the plays. Or not Scott Linehan, the individual they had, his name escapes me. They ended up getting Scott Linehan to replace Joe Brady. But Coach O went up there and said, no, Joe Brady was nothing to do with our offense. But we'd just seen LSU's offense be stagnant for years on years on years on years until they get Joe Brady. Now they look modern. He leaves and they're stagnant. But I'm to believe that Joe Brady was nothing to do with the modernization of the offense? Maybe my mind just doesn't work like that. But to me, like if you keep doing something and expect a different result, that's the definition of insanity. And then all of a sudden you get a different guy in there and it works. And now you're saying that that guy was nothing to do. That didn't make any sense with me. S. Minger. Thank you, Boyd. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That name escaped me. Absolutely escaped me. And I'm not trying to pile on him, but I think y'all get what I'm saying. That was ludicrous to say that this had nothing to do with Joe Brady. Absolutely bonkers. And then you double down and say that, no, our defense is going to be just fine without Dave Aranda. And you go get Bo Pelini. At that point, he then said something even dumber by saying, I didn't even interview him. I just had a feeling. That level of arrogance is not going to lend itself to success in college football, not when there are brilliant coaches around. I want you to think of this. You have Coach O, who wins one national championship and then says that, oh, Aranda wasn't that big of a deal. Joe Brady wasn't that big of a deal. And I'm not even going to interview people. Then you have Nick Saban, who loses an opportunity at a national championship and completely revitalizes the way he runs his offensive program because he doesn't want to be stagnant. There's differences, and you have got to have adaptability. And I really worry about Coach O's adaptability. And I think that the nail in the coffin is when everybody was having the marches surrounding equality. And the LSU players didn't even tell Coach O. He showed up to practice and there wasn't anybody there. And he has to find out then that his players are marching without him. But you look around college football, Kirby's marching with his team. Lane's marching with his team. Nick's marching with his team. That says something. That says something, right? And that's why, like, that's going to be a hot seat. LSU is not very good right now. And it's just a messy situation all the way around. Michael asks, how would Penn State match up with Alabama and or Georgia? I don't think well. I don't. I just don't think well, Michael. I think that Penn State is a really good team, but I think right now you have to have either a shutdown defense to really take advantage of Alabama's youth on offense, and then a shutdown defense to take advantage of Georgia's offense and their kind of inconsistencies, because when Georgia's offense is clicking, they're great. They're really, really solid, but Clemson was able to affect them. I just don't know if I see Penn State being able to really do that to either of those teams. I just don't know if I see that. So, when we're talking about that, that's already why I say the LSU has got a lot of interesting things happening. I think there'll be some coaching positions opened up, and LSU is an absolute dumpster fire. But there's more to talk about in the SEC than just that. You have Alabama absolutely dismantling Ole Miss this week, a game that many people thought would be closer than it was. I'd actually picked it to be at about 14 points, and I was wrong. You remember last weekend in the live stream, we were talking about how the 20-point spread seemed like it could be a bit wide, and come to find out they were right, and this is why Vegas is who they are. This is absolutely why Vegas is who they are. I mean, they're not trying to lose money. Alabama goes out there and dismantles Ole Miss, and I had my popcorn. I don't know if y'all had y'all's popcorn, but I certainly had mine. Absolutely had mine. Andrew asks, do you think Alabama's defense is starting to find their identity, or do you think it was just a well put together game and they still need a lot to work on? This is one of those things where I think, as always, the truth lies right in the middle, Andrew. I think that Alabama's defense, if you look at the weeks that go on, they've been improving in aspects week by week, and that just makes sense, right? That just absolutely makes sense. That's the nature of college football. But that's not to say that the mission is done. And here's why I say that. If you go back and watch the Ole Miss game, there's no reason that Ole Miss should have had more than 7 points in that game. Now, y'all can say that I'm being nitpicky, this, that, or the other. If you have time, watch the game. There's no reason Ole Miss should have more than 7 points in that game. If you look at the drives that they ended up scoring on, a busted coverage. And then how many different times could Alabama have cut off a drive earlier if the tackle would have been made? Right? And look, Alabama did a great job of not allowing drives to sustain. They got them off the field. But, maybe they get 1 or 2 less first downs if the tackle is made. So Alabama's defense is absolutely starting to find their identity, but that doesn't also mean that there's not more to work on, not more to come together, because you need for communication to still be good. I think you need for the defensive front to still remain very strong, especially going in to A&M, who has a fantastic running back. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Their offensive line is anemic right now, though, so that benefits Alabama greatly. But I think it's in the middle. Alabama's defense is getting better and better as the weeks go on, but there's still work to do. Did it look like Saban let them score more? Didn't look upset when Ole Miss scored. It looked like he was just giving the young guys playing time. I think he absolutely was giving the young guys playing time, but at the same time, Andrew, we know Saban, right? Like, even when the young guys, even when they give up a touchdown, he's not happy about it. And he might not look mad on TV, but it's probably because he's sitting there thinking, okay, well, I have something to actually go back and teach. There was I forget when the game was. It was long ago, well before I was around, well before I was born. Nick Saban had won a game and they gave up a touchdown. And I believe it was when he was at Michigan State. And he was irate. And someone went up to him and they said, hey, why are you so mad? You just blew this team out and only gave up 1 touchdown. And he said, well, I'm not mad. I'm actually excited. And they said, well, why? You were just throwing a fit on the field. And he said, well, I mean, I was mad out there, but I'm excited because I have something to teach my kids. That's Nick Saban. So, it's something that will be continued to work on as the weeks go on, but the defense is coming together. The linebacking core was much better, and that's really the big juxtaposition. The one area, though, Andrew, that I think that Alabama really needs to improve on is the safety position. Alabama got very lucky that they were able to dominate the line of scrimmage in the manner they were, but the safety position needs to continue improving for Alabama ultimately to get where they want to go and be secure against some other teams, that they aren't going to just flat out dominate on the line of scrimmage. Will Anderson will probably dominate anybody, but it's the teams outside of that. Says, okay, here we go. Okay, last plea deal. I'll give you 2 walk-on running backs, 4 cheerleaders, our backup punter, 1 oil well, and a promise to try and not make fun of him. I want 1 5-star running. No. Not going to happen, man. Not going to happen. We need those running backs, especially with the injury to Jace. And that's another thing. If you didn't see my video today, check it out. I talked about how that loss can be mitigated. It is a loss that will be felt. Jace is a very talented young man right down the street from where I'm currently sitting in Alito, Texas. I got to watch him play in high school where JoJo Earl played as well. You talk about a fun duo, man, in high school. Goodness. Those two were electric. But now that he goes down, Alabama's absolutely going to need the running back depth in order to mitigate the loss, especially what he provides out the backfield. Georgia needs to be on the lookout against Auburn. Jordan Hare is a tough place to play. It has been a challenge for Georgia in the past. Yeah. I mean, look, Auburn is such a weird team, man. Like, you think we have a beat on Auburn, and then one week they look terrible. The next week they're playing high-quality football, and it's very hard to figure out just who Auburn is, right? It's very hard to figure that out. But Georgia, let's talk about Georgia, because going into the Arkansas game, I thought that game would be closer than it was, and Georgia flat out spanked them. Now, for Arkansas, the one thing I talked about for Arkansas is if you're going to play against Georgia and you're going to try and beat Georgia, you cannot beat yourself and the dogs. And that's exactly what happened. Arkansas kept getting themselves in penalty trouble. And look, my contention isn't that if they hadn't have done that, that they would have won. That's not my contention here. I'm just saying it's next to impossible when you put yourself in that position and now you're trying to win a football game. It just doesn't usually work out, and it absolutely didn't work out for the Razorbacks against Georgia. Georgia is really solid. They are allowing 4.6 points per game right now. That defensive front is stout as can be. And their offense is a unit that I just continue looking at thinking, okay, well, this is going to be very interesting, especially when JT Daniels comes back fully. Georgia has got a lot of intrigue around it right now. That's why I say I think that it's right now, and there's a long season to go. It's Alabama, Georgia, and then it's your number 3 team. It really is. Alabama and Georgia have separated themselves to this point. Doesn't mean that it will end like that, but that's just the reality of the situation right now. He says, Chicken Chill, we have a better running back coming to OU next year. Hey, OU does have some good running backs coming next year, but let's remember, Emmanuel Henderson, 5-star running back, and I believe still number 1 running back in the nation, still committed to the Alabama Crimson Tide, just absolutely continuing that dominance at the running back position. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. He says, you better leave Brown alone or Sooners will spot your house in Texas. Hey, I'm not going to lie, man. I would love to have Raleek Brown as a part of the Crimson Tide class. Every college in the nation would love to have Raleek Brown. I mean, that kid is so exciting. He's so good. He's a really fun player to watch. He's going to be great at the next level. I can't wait. Andrew said, Roydell looks like a stud. Trey Sanders should come around. Robinson is a stud, and Saban will probably find someone else with past experience to put in. Yeah, I completely agree. And it's just unfortunate that Kamar Wheaton is hurt right now. I don't know the extent of his injury. I read something along the lines of it's something to do with meniscus. Saban said something about that. I'm not really sure, but I mean, I would love for Kamar Wheaton to get in there right now because his ability, my God. You know, I've been very lucky living in the area I do to see a lot of these talented players in this North Texas area. I got to watch Kamar. It's the same thing, right? Like I said it with JoJo. JoJo Earl looks great in film, but you watch him live. Wow. I mean, he was special for Alito last year, state championship. He gets a pass, has no business even gaining 1 yard after he got the football, and he broke it for like 65 for a touchdown. He's unbelievable. Sean says Wheaton would probably be the fastest player on Bama's roster. He could certainly be up there. That young man has got burners. I mean, I've watched fast people try and catch him and look not fast. Like that great quote from Longest Yard, he's so fast, he makes fast people look not fast. And it holds up. He's absolutely that guy. He is absolutely that guy. Let's talk a bit about Texas A&M. Texas A&M drops their second game to Mississippi State, takes on Alabama this weekend. And look, I've talked about Texas A&M since the offseason, saying if we want to talk about the talent they have on their defense, I grant you that. Can of corn and I'll be fine. Yeah, exactly. Can of corn and we'll be just fine. So Texas A&M, you know, when we look back at what I've said about them over the past, Texas A&M has got talent on the defensive side of the ball, and that's why I never really touched that side of the ball. I was like, okay, yeah, I'm not going to argue there. They got some really talented names on that side. How it comes together, I don't know. We'll see. I had a lot. And frightening, I think you and I talked about it a lot. Cameron, I know you and I talked about it a lot, so both of you can back me up here. Both Cameron and Frightening can back me up. I had a lot of worry about A&M's offense, and it did not have anything to do with the quarterback position. That doesn't help, but it has nothing to do with the quarterback position. My biggest concern for A&M's offense was the offensive line. And I think as football fans, we can become so desensitized to the offensive line, especially in the age of high-powered offense, right? You see the quarterbacks, the running backs, the wide receivers, the tight ends. They make so many plays. And so we look at the offensive line and we're like, oh, well, that's a piece. But we need to remember that is the piece. That is the piece. If you don't have an offensive line, you're going to have a hard time doing anything. And a lot of people, I really felt like, completely underestimated how good A&M's offensive line was last year. If you cannot keep up, it is just going to be a dumpster fire. If you cannot keep your quarterback upright, you're going to struggle. A lot of A&M fans would always come on to the channel and they'd talk about, and look, they were right in saying this. They were like, oh, well, the big loss is Kellen Mond. Now we have to replace our quarterback. And I'm like, yeah, I agree there. That is a big loss. But to me, the bigger loss is the offensive line. And when you combine them together, you have a problem. You have to replace your offensive line and your quarterback, and the quarterback's been there forever. That, to me, was a recipe for struggle. And this is the struggle I was talking about. You know, to credit, RJ Young talked about it as well. I can't remember when, but A&M fans were really after him. I do remember someone sent me that video, and he said something very similar. He's like, I don't think people realize the importance of what A&M's offensive line was. And he thought A&M would lose a few games. And they are. And if you think it's going to get better before you play Bama, they better fix something. Because Will Anderson is not playing around this year, and he's going to come. And look, we can talk about A&M having to replace Kellen Mond, and then, you know, Haynes King gets hurt, and then Zach Calzada comes in. But do we really think there would be a discernible difference between Haynes King and Zach Calzada? And I'm not asking that as a rhetorical question. I'm asking that as a a legitimate question. I don't know. But I don't think it would be the big enough difference to really make a difference at all. You said you saw RJ at Quick Trip here in Tulsa. Man, I've been such a big fan of that guy for years. A big inspiration for me to make the jump, doing this field right here and actually trying to, you know, carve out a career in the sports field. He's a huge inspiration for that. A really big inspiration for that. So I really believe they're scared since they found out that their daddy and our crazy brother from A&M. So I think people are talking about Brownlow Dindy. That's going to be an awesome recruiting battle to watch. I have no idea what's going to happen there. I know crystal balls have been inserted in favor of Oklahoma, and it really doesn't help whenever you see A&M struggle the way they are. Look, if you're a high school recruit and you are high on a team, let's say you're high on A&M. If they start losing some games, that might not be the reason that you don't go there. But if you're in between one school and another, and one school is and one of the schools you're in between is having a really tough season, might make you look more stridently at the other school. And that might be what we're seeing right now. I'm not saying that is what's happening. I am certainly not in his camp. I'm giving you my interpretation of how I would look at these things. OU isn't as bad as they were in the beginning of the season. Their offense has started to click, but the defense is struggling with injuries. The Texas game would tell us a lot. Your thoughts? So I agree a lot, Jace. I really do. I think OU has gotten better as the season goes on, but I still think there's a ways to go. And I don't mean to say that to pile on. You know, it's kind of funny. I had a lot of OU fans, not a lot. I shouldn't say that. I had a few OU fans kind of upset with me. By far and about most of the OU fans, most of the fans of this channel, y'all are awesome. I mean, the conversations you have with each other, with me, 9.9 times out of 10, it's nothing but respectful. The trash talk between you is 99% of the time respectful and a good time. That's why I don't touch comments on my channel. If YouTube takes it off, I'll find out later because they automatically remove some stuff, but I just let it happen because you guys have fostered a really special community in how people interact with each other, right? So I'm not trying to pile on OU, but there is still work to be done. And the reason I say that, Jace, if I didn't think that OU couldn't be any better, I would say that, oh yeah, no, the work is almost done. But OU is a very talented team, and they're still not to where I think they could be. And so maybe that's why I take the position I do. It's not out of trying to pile on. It's out of knowing what could be. So I do agree. OU has been getting better. The offensive line must continue to improve, especially going forward. Because let's say you win out, you make it into the college football playoff, right? Now you're looking at Oklahoma's offensive line taking on let's say either Georgia's front or Alabama's front. That's a tough ask if you're having offensive line problems. And even Alabama right now, they're working through their offensive line issues, a lot of new faces. I'm glad they don't play Georgia this week because I have faith that the offensive line will get right, but Georgia's defensive line is right now. You get what I mean? And like Oklahoma, it's the same thing. I have faith that they'll get right, but it has to come about. As far as the defense struggling with injuries, yeah, that's unfortunate, right? That is unfortunate. It's part of football. Hopefully those guys can be back sooner rather than later. No pun intended, given I'm saying that to an Oklahoma fan. But the defense has continued to improve. And I think at the end of the day, I talked about this with Cameron one time. He was asking me about my thoughts on how Alabama and Oklahoma's defense would look this year. And he asked me if I thought that they would each be a top 10 defense. And I told him, I don't know that Alabama and Oklahoma will be a top 10 defense, but I don't think they need to be. The way college football is played right now, you just need a defense that can stop somebody. If your offense is good, you're good. And Oklahoma's defense, in fairness, I think as long as they continue progressing on the path that they are, they're good enough to hurt people. They are. It's about the offense coming together. And look, it's the same for everybody in college football. It's a long season to go. It's not about how you start. It's about how you finish. And the one thing I will say for Oklahoma right now is you're learning how to win tough games. That is something. You're learning how to win tough games. You're learning how to win a game where you just got punched in the jaw a few times and you have to respond. There is something to that. There is something to that. And that's good that Oklahoma is actually having to do that. Well, Ty, you've replaced RJ on Oklahoma content. I missed the old. Nah, like, thank you. Thank you very much. But I think the thing we have to remember, man, is RJ has a dream, and I think I can get it because I'm looking at it being at the very base of where he started. And, that guy still has a ton of love for Oklahoma football, but he had to make his dream a reality. You know what I mean? And so he talks about everybody, and maybe it's not in the manner that, some people would like. But at the end of the day, man, he is very good at what he does. And I still have, I have years and years and years and years of work to even be mentioned in the same sentence as RJ Young. So I really appreciate it, but I'm cognizant enough to know I'm not in that same even sentence yet as RJ Young. I get that. I have a lot of work to do and I'm perfectly fine with that. It's all part of the game. Michael says, if you're going to beat Alabama, you better do it this year or they could three-peat. Bama's actually young this year. Yeah. Alabama, if you look at how things could shake up, this year was big for Alabama. Not necessarily for Alabama, for teams wanting to capitalize on Alabama. Because, look, Oklahoma, just fantastic recruiting class, right? Just a fantastic recruiting class for the 2023 period. But if you look at Alabama and the talent that's in the state of Alabama in the class of 2023, we know Alabama is going to be a top 5 recruiting class. We don't know this, but given historical implications, the way things go, I think it's safe to say we know Alabama will be a top 5 recruiting class. But then you look at the talent they have in the state, that's going to be a very good recruiting class in 2023 as well as them putting together another solid recruiting class this year to go along with the recruiting class they had last year. Alabama is really getting strong. And I know that sounds crazy because they are strong and they are the pinnacle, but to see it not slow down at all. And, I know that there might be some people saying like, hey, it hasn't slowed down in the past, so why would this be any different? Because at the end of the day, all things come to an end. All things come to an end. That's the nature of life. And so with that in mind, with all things coming to an end, then you look at everything Alabama lost, returning 3 starters on offense. And it's a talented offense. We know it's a talented offense. But God, man, seeing them do what they do right now is unbelievable. And it's something that, most of you get this. Most of you that watch this channel, like that's why I took a time to talk about how much I appreciate y'all and the community y'all have built, right? Because it's nothing I've done. It's the way y'all interact with each other, the respect you carry for each other, and you've managed to make this a community where people enjoy talking football, right? So all that is great, but it goes back to what I'm saying when I say that I want everybody, whether you're an Alabama fan or not, to really appreciate what Nick Saban is doing right now, because we may never see this again. It might not occur in our lifetimes again. We're watching history. We're really watching history. Let's appreciate it. You know what I mean? Like, that's not to say I want it to stop, nothing like that, but it is just absolutely unreal. And Michael, you're 100% right. To think about how this dynasty has been and then looking into the future and seeing a legitimate path to success, sustained success. I mean, it's just incredible. It is absolutely incredible. Just awesome to see. So Jace asks, okay, leaving though, do you think anyone has a chance against Georgia's defense or Alabama's young offense? And if they meet each other, do you think wins? Ooh, this is a great question. This is a fantastic question. So do I think anybody has a chance against? I think that there are people that could take advantage of some of the things Georgia's defense does, but you have to be realistic in your expectations. Do I think there's anybody that's going to go out there and hang 65 on Georgia? Probably not. I don't. I just think that they are really solid in what they do. They're just really solid to what they do, right? So I think you can take advantage of some aspects, but it's very few teams in the country that I just look at and I'm like, okay, well, just straight up, I have complete faith that your offense is going to be able to do anything against Georgia's defense. Now, for Alabama, this weekend is going to be very important. This weekend is going to be hugely important for Alabama because A&M has on paper a decent defense. They haven't been playing up to ability, but that is what it is, right? So if they met each other, who do I think wins? I'm going to say Alabama because that, right? I couldn't pick against Alabama, but I will say this. If you ask me to assign a percentage, it'd be close. I think it'd be a great game, but at the end of the day, it's also, it's not only about, the players. It's Nick Saban. It's Nick Saban, right? At the end of the day, I'm going to bet it on Nick Saban. And, maybe that makes me a homer. Maybe it does. If it does, please let me know in the comments. But I would ask you this. If Nick Saban was your head coach, wouldn't you feel the same? Right? Like, I think that's fair. If Nick Saban was your head coach, I think it's a completely logical argument to say, hey, even though these teams are 1 and 2 in the nation, even though these teams are both very good and this could be a fantastic football game, I'm going to pick Alabama to win because of Saban. I just think he's earned that. I mean, he's been unbelievable. And he's perfect against assistants. Perfect. So, yeah, but it'd be a great game, Jace. Absolutely a great game. Absolutely. Said you, Onakino, Eichard, Daily, I need to still listen to RJ. Mixes ask Sweaty Gary comments. Yeah, no, look, man, RJ is unbelievable. Like, I have a lot of respect for what he does. I really enjoy watching Onikuno's channel. That guy cracks me up. I mean, that guy will really crack me up. I think some of the things he says and does, he's just a really entertaining channel to watch. I have a lot of fun watching his stuff. I'd really like to work with him sometime in the future. I'd really like to work with RJ, but, I got a lot to go before I'm on the same level as those guys. I mean, they've been doing it a long time. I have a lot to learn. I have a lot to improve on, but I really appreciate even being mentioned with them, but I just don't think I'm there yet. It's awesome for me to hear from y'all, like it is, but I still have a lot to work on, truly. Says, I've been watching since 1970 and have never seen anything like Bama's current program. I mean, look, I've read and tried to do a lot of research into college football, and there have been unbelievable periods. There have been records that I don't think will ever be broken, like Oklahoma's win streak. I mean, there are so many things in college football that I just don't know that will ever be repeated, and I think we're living in one of them right now. And that's what Saban's doing. Not only in winning, but in development and recruiting and everything. look at the way the sport is changing in an answer to him. It's unbelievable to see. It is so cool to watch. It is so cool to watch. Andrew says Saban as a head coach is worth at least 14 points by himself. And that's, I think everybody kind of gets the general point I'm trying to make here, right? And look, if there's ever a point y'all disagree with me, Frightening and I don't know if Frightening is still in here. He's a Texas fan, right? He and I have had little debates. I love talking college football, and I'm absolutely open to the possibility that I'm wrong. I mean, ask my girlfriend. If you ask her, she'll tell you that I'm wrong 99.9% of the time. I disagree with that, but she would certainly not disagree with that. So if you disagree, we'll talk about it. I love having this right here. So this is really cool. I feel like we're having a podcast together, just talking football. Much love. Hey, I can't express enough appreciation for you even taking the time out of your day to come in here and talk football. That's awesome, man. Like I said it before, this is a lot like a therapy session to me. I've had a lot of stuff happened in the past few years. It's not to talk about here. That will be for a different day. But this is literally like a therapy session to me. And all of you contribute to that. And that's why, and a lot of the times, I still comment back and say, thank you so much for taking the time to watch, because that means a ton. It means a whole lot. Predict score, Oklahoma, Texas. I'm going to be 100% wrong on this. I'm going to be 100% wrong on this, right? Whew. Predict the score, Oklahoma versus Texas. So this is just for right now. I'm going to reserve the right to change this answer as the game gets here. I'll have a more finite answer, South on Main, before the game. But just right now, because usually this live stream is talking about what happened this past weekend. But hey, I love interacting with y'all. So predict a score. I'm going to say, oh boy, we'll say 56-49 in favor of Oklahoma. In favor of Oklahoma. The reason is right now is I just think that Oklahoma has got a lot of consistency in what they want to do schematically. Texas is still building, right? And Texas has a whole lot of upside. And if you were to tell me at the end of this game that Texas was able to get Oklahoma, I wouldn't be surprised, because when you look at the way Texas is playing, they're playing really solid football. But they did have a quarterback change in the middle of the year. That is a real thing, right? They're still building that continuity with him. That's not to say that Oklahoma isn't still working through things. They absolutely are. But they've had more continuity on every level of their football team than Texas. Frightening, do you think that that's fair? Genuinely, do you think that's fair? Because when I'm looking at this saying, okay, they've had more consistency at the head coaching position. And Frightening can attest, I love the Texas hires across the board. I love the Texas hires across the board. Steve Sarkisian, great. But it's not just him. PK, I think, is great. I think Bo Davis is great, right? All of that. Now, look, no, Frightening. I think that you're right here, right? And this is the thing. This is one of those interesting points where, depending on which side of the aisle you're at, you look at it from a different lens. This is true in a lot of things in life. And I think that I want to point it out, because I think that if every one of us walked through life realizing this point, we'd be a lot better off in establishing some sort of just understanding of each other, of the people next to us. There are a lot of times where, like, I can make the point about Oklahoma having more consistency at all levels, at the quarterback position, and that being why ultimately I give them the nod. And Frightening makes the counterpoint of, well, I think that the quarterback change actually gives us a higher chance. That's a real point, because if you look at how Texas's offense has operated with Casey Thompson, everything Frightening just said right there is true. They've been better. The team is playing more inspired. It looks better, and they've been good on offense. But at the same time, that doesn't really dismiss what I said. You know what I mean? Like, oh, no, hey, we know what it is, Frightening, but me coming from, moot court and debate, I love these sort of points where we can look at something and say that two sides of the same coin, just a different way of looking at it, right? But no matter what, we know what this game is. We know what this game is. There's a reason why people who don't watch football tune in to watch this game. This is one of the premier rivalries in sports. Forget college football. In sports. This is going to be a great game. I cannot wait for this one. I mean, I think we can say the same thing about everything, every Red River rivalry, but this one has a lot riding on it. Aesthetics Hardstyle says Georgia and Bama are going undefeated to the SEC championship, and no matter who wins, they are both going to the playoffs and settle it for the national championship. Texas is going to beat Oklahoma. Hey, I completely agree with the first part. It's something that I talked about before the season even started, and I kept highlighting. I kept making videos and saying, we really need to watch this game one with Georgia Clemson because this game is going to decide a playoff spot. The reason I felt like that is because I looked at the season for Clemson in particular, and I looked at it and said, if Clemson drops this game, they don't have the season and the strength of schedule, in my opinion, to get back in the college football playoffs. Now, when we're looking at it, we see that they're not going to the college football playoffs. They're not. They're just not. But Georgia winning that game now creates a situation. He said, "Must be your debate background." Yeah, you're 100% right. It is. I had a lot of training in debate. We'll talk about that at later dates because I have some funny stories about those times. But I mean, I have stories about, I have a professor in college who, when we'd be doing oral argumentation for some legal proceedings, she'd sit in front of us. And if she asked a question and we didn't answer quick enough, she had a spray bottle. I mean, just fun stuff like that, right? Like, it's always great. But going back to that, the playoff point, I completely think we're going to see two SEC teams. Someone asked me my playoff prediction earlier. It's very hard to say, but I think that we're going to see two SEC teams. Right now, I think we have to like where Cincinnati's at, because as much as there's a lot of room for the Big 12 to get a team, or the Big 10 to get a team in there, there's a lot of competitive play in the Big 10. The Big 12 could get a team in there. Right? It's wide open, but I think right now there's two SEC teams are in. Two SEC teams are in no matter what. Says, I think the Oklahoma has a chance at the playoff, but if the O-line doesn't figure things out and the defense injuries are definite, they'll be first-round exits. As an OU fan, open to Chris. No, I don't disagree, Jace. I think that that's incredibly realistic. I absolutely think that that is very, very realistic. I think that that's a perfect synopsis of where you are. Oklahoma, if everything is clicking, they have the ability. They do. They absolutely do. No doubt about it. But if the offensive line doesn't come together, it's just when we look at the teams in the playoffs, they have good defensive fronts. Isaiah says, you have Texas winning. Look, I'm not mad at that because, like I said, styles make matchups. And even though this is a game where usually all that goes out the window, you have Bijan Robinson. You can scheme him to do just about anything you want. And then you have a guy who's incredibly creative at scheming in Steve Sarkisian. You have PK, who is an absolute wizard on the defensive side of the football. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. Chicken says Ohio State will come around and win the Big Ten. But that's exactly why, Chicken, earlier in this, I pointed out some of the teams within the Big Ten and saying there's a lot of ways to go in this. It's going to be a ton of fun. It's going to be a ton of fun. Sooner, you have Bama, Cincinnati, OU, Georgia. So I think one question, Sooner, is this as of right now, or is this as you're thinking it will end up being? Because if it's as it ends up, I can get why Georgia would be 4, because then you're assuming Alabama beats Georgia. You move Georgia down to 4 just because they have the loss. Everything goes on. If OSU or Michigan win out, they'll get in over Cincy. Yeah, probably. I think I think it will probably be deserving, because if you look at the teams they'll have to go through to get there, especially with how the Big Ten is sitting right now with ranks, it'll probably be fair in that regard. Because I don't know about at our best beating Alabama and Georgia. We thought this was going to be our year while the other teams kind of break in their new quarterbacks. Yeah, look, And that ultimately is why I was so high on the Sooners, and I haven't moved off the Sooners, right? But that was ultimately in the offseason why I was so high on the Sooners is I looked around the landscape of college football and I'm like, okay, well, I think there's about to be a ton of great quarterbacks in college football, but Oklahoma has continuity at the coaching staff. They have continuity on defense. They have continuity on a lot of places, wide receiver, and most importantly, quarterback. Now, the offensive line is really hurting them right now, and hopefully that's something they can get worked out. But I think that's why the improvement of the Oklahoma defense mixed with the quarterback is exactly why so many people were so high on them going into this season. So it's going to be something to watch. How do you think the crowd will affect the players in the Red River rivalry? I don't know. And I think this is a really intriguing question because most years it's, it'll affect them, but they're used to playing in hostile environments. But coming off of COVID, I don't know how it will affect them. But we can say this right here. Stadiums that have gotten really loud and rowdy this year have affected the games. So with that in mind, I think there's a absolute possibility that it does, but it'll be on both sides, which is, great. The Big Ten is kind of nasty right now. They have 4. Yeah, look, the Big Ten has got so many different ways to go, and that's why there's a lot that could happen in the Big Ten. If you're not a Big Ten fan, I think it's a great time for you to at least start watching the Big Ten because there's a lot of exciting football to be played. Sooner thinks they destroyed themselves, or Sooner thinks that the Big Ten is going to destroy themselves, which I can get because of that point I just made. You have so many ranked teams in there. They have to go through each other. It's a gauntlet right now. Noah, Roll Tide, absolutely. They would drop Georgia to 3, so it's Bama, Cincinnati, Georgia, OU. That'd be interesting because the thing with dropping Georgia to 3 means you'd have a, once again, them playing back to back off of the SEC championship. So that'd be very interesting to see. Timothy says the defensive line will win the game for the Sooners. The defensive line for both of these teams, both Texas and Oklahoma, are going to be massively important in this game. Frightening says, see me and UT will face me. We're going to get crushed. Have I ever been to a Red River game? I have not. In fact, I have only ever been to a handful of college football games. And my first college football game ever was way back when. My dad took me to the Cotton Bowl, and it was Nebraska, and I believe, I forget who Nebraska played. But it was when they had Brandon Jackson as the running back, really talented running back, played with Green Bay for a while. It was a great time. That was my first college football game. My second was when I was touring Alabama. I got to watch their game. Unbelievable. Bryant-Denny Stadium was unreal. And then, going to UNT, University of North Texas, that's where I graduated. Got to see some games there. That was awesome. And then this past year, I was very lucky and got to be in a sweet box for the Armed Forces Bowl. The name escaped me for a while, but at TCU, I was in the press box for that Tulsa, Mississippi State Armed Forces game. And that was wild, especially there at the end. But I've never been to the Red River rivalry. I would love to go one year. I would absolutely love to go one year. Talking Iowa, Penn State, I think whoever wins this game will win the Big Ten against Ohio State. Iowa's defense is really good, and Ohio State has been struggling. Yeah, the Iowa-Penn State game is going to be awesome. I'm sorry, I just saw a comment from Frightening, and we're going to address that. I'm actually going to pick Iowa. Someone else asked me about the Iowa-Penn State game. I'm actually going to pick Iowa to win that game because I think Iowa has looked really, really good this year. I think Iowa has looked really solid. I really do. I think Iowa's going to be really hard to beat. Aesthetic says, I think everything is lining up for Cincy to get in. The Big Ten looks good, but worried they could knock each other out. ACC is out. Notre Dame out. It's wide open this year. This year is so much fun. So much fun. Isaiah, I'm going to pick Iowa. I am. Oh, okay. That's my fault, Sean. I misinterpreted what you said. Hacker Music, thank you for coming in here, man. Appreciate you taking the time. He said, I'm not really at all happy with Alabama's middle linebacker play, especially Harris, but I seldom hear it mentioned except by people who really study film. Yeah, the middle linebacking position has been kind of up and down for Alabama. They have plays where they're looking really good, and then the next play, it's the same problem that's plagued Alabama for years, right? And it's not a one-off to this year. And so that's why it's very hard for me to identify exactly what it is this year when it's something that we've continued to see. It's the reason why when I'm talking about Oklahoma and I talk about, well, I can identify a defensive problem on Oklahoma in the middle linebacker position. Some people said like, oh, we don't think it's that big of a deal. But Hacker, to your point, I know it's a big deal because I've watched Alabama struggle in the middle linebacker department for a few years now. It's not where it should be. I am holding out how worried I am because there are times where it's really looking solid, and then it's times where it's really just a work in progress. And because of that, I have faith in Christian Harris. He's been there. I think it'll come together, but it is something we need to watch. And I don't disagree at all. I think that it's not being talked about enough. I do completely agree there. But I also wonder, right, if that's because it's been just inconsistent or if people just aren't identifying it. That's kind of where I'm at. Sark has earned respect. Great win over TCU after being 2-7 in the last 9 versus them. Sark goes in there. Year 1 meets TCU. No, that's a great win. That is a great win. I'm not going to discount anything about that win. Now, I do want to identify one of these. You're not wrong. Frightening. There are very few awesome UNT games. I love UNT football, by the way. I love them. Like, absolutely. I do remember when I just remember, God, what year was it? When they took on Georgia. That was a great game. Had Georgia on the ropes going into the fourth quarter, and then depth just absolutely killed us. I mean, just absolutely killed us. Used to work in Thackerville, Chicken. I mean, I grew up in Gainesville. I went to Gainesville High School, graduated from there, so I'm right there. I'm from right there. So, yeah, I know that area very well. Kenneth Roll Tide. I hope they go back-to-back. Sean says, Casey Thompson going to try and knock out his home state school. We got to attack and not let off to beat Texas this year. Yeah, no, look, Oklahoma has got to keep their foot on the gas the whole time if they want to beat Texas. Texas has got a lot to prove. They have got a lot they want to, have people know about them. And then we have to remember this. This could be the last time we see this matchup in the Big 12. It could be. You want to leave it on a high note, especially when we look at the state of the Big 12. This is the biggest game outside of the Big 12 championship that happens every year in the Big 12. This could be the last time that it's played for with the Big 12 on the line. That's going to be awesome. When I see Bryce having all that time to pass, I knew Bama's for real. The offensive line is incredible. Ole Miss and Arkansas are good teams. And the craziest thing, aesthetics, is the offensive line for Bama is still actually coming together. It's still gelling. It's still improving. It's a good unit, but it's one that needs to come together. And I'm talking about Gainesville, Texas. No, it's not as big as Gainesville, Georgia, or Florida. But, funny story about that, I'll tell real quick. I'm almost going to have to censor myself because I know I know YouTube picks up on some of key words people will say, and you can get demonetized for it. But when I was in high school, somebody actually called in a big threat, we'll say, to Gainesville High School. But they called it in to every Gainesville high school in the nation. So I'm coming from the community college that's just right across the street from Gainesville High School. I get there and everybody's lined up in the football field. Police are everywhere. I get stopped at the gate and they say, just go home. So no, I mean, we get confused with Gainesville anywhere else all the time. Gainesville, Texas, very small town, very small town. Just nothing there. Absolutely nothing there. No, I mean, it was, Gainesville, Texas is a wild place. Onikuno said the same thing about we played pretty good. I don't know. I think y'all are talking to each other. But I will say this. I think that there are reasons for Oklahoma fans. If some fans are a little bit worried, I think there are reasons for that. And for some fans that aren't worried, I think there are reasons for that. It's just about understanding where each other are coming from, right? No. You are not getting your running back, chicken. It is not happening. No. Not going to happen at all. No, not even close. Not even close. So some things we're going to talk about before we close, because I'll be getting out of here here pretty soon. Gotta get everything ready for the girlfriend coming home and all of that. Going out to eat this evening. But some of the things I want to talk about moving forward. And the last thing we'll talk about here. And that is, let's see, I had it pulled up. Let me get to it. That is actually the preview of this weekend's games, right? Playoff prediction. Thank you. Thank you, Sooners. We're going to talk about playoff prediction and just a really quick synopsis of this weekend's game. If I had to give my playoff prediction right now, I'm going Alabama, Georgia, in no particular order. I'm just going to give my 4 teams. I'm not saying this is 1, 2, 3. I'm in no particular order. My playoff prediction, Alabama, Georgia. I think someone from the Big Ten will sneak in because we've seen the committee have a bias against a team that's not a Power 5 team. And the Big Ten right now has a lot of ranked teams that are going to be playing each other. Maybe it could be Iowa. They have the opportunity if they go out and win. We'll see. But I think it'll be a Big Ten team. And then probably Oklahoma, if Oklahoma can win this weekend and win the Big 12 championship. Those would be my 4. But this year, it's very hard to pick a top 4. It's very hard. James asks, is this Ed Odron's last season? I think it might be, James. I have a whole bit on Ed Odron, and I did it at the beginning of this, and I'll quickly do it again. That way, for anybody who wasn't in there at the beginning, you can hear it. I am in no way meaning to say that I don't think Ed Odron isn't a good football coach, right? I'm sitting here on YouTube talking to y'all, having a great time, but he's the head football coach of a premier college. So I'm in no way saying that he's not a good football mind. He has more football knowledge than I could hope to have, right? That's just the reality of the situation. However, when I look at it and I see Ed Odron dismiss the assistants he had on his team, Ed Odron being a trenches guy and having his trenches just be dominated, and then this one doesn't have anything to do with football, and I'm not trying to get political when I say this, but to me, this was damning. This was very damning. Whenever all the teams last year organized their marches, and we see Nick Saban marching with the Crimson Tide, and what a picture. We see Georgia, we see Ole Miss, and then you see LSU. And his team decided to do a march without ever even telling the head coach. That tells you right there how they view Ed Odron. And I'm not going to say that they don't like Ed Odron. I don't know. They could love Ed Odron as a football coach. As a football coach. But at a certain point, this is bigger than football. Right? Like we all sit here and talk about the football side of things, and I love football. I love it. But this is also preparing young men for life. And I just, because of that, I think that he is in a really bad spot. I do. Richard, I saw you come in here. Hope you're doing good, my man. Glad you could make it in here. Hope your day and week has been good. Let's talk about this. You said still needs to gel. I would like to see one of those 2 5-stars. Yeah, the offensive line right now on the right side, something has got to change. And that's what I talked about. I think some people might think I'm nitpicking, but it's just, there's still work to do on this Alabama offensive line. It was better last week, but it needs to get better before they ultimately take on Georgia. Because Georgia's front is good, very good. And Alabama has the ability to beat them, no doubt about it. But the offensive line needs to continue to gel. No matter what. I completely agree. Richard saying he has Alabama, Georgia, Cincinnati, Penn State for the college football playoff. I don't disagree with this list. The reason I don't have Cincinnati on there is I just think that we've seen time and time again this committee is not interested in non-Power 5 teams. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that Cincinnati doesn't deserve to be in there. I just think that the committee has shown their hand so many times in the past. Now, maybe this year will be different because of the unbelievable nature of this season, because so many things have gone completely up in the air. Maybe this year will be different, but I don't know. I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see. I was really rooting for Owens, Richard. I was, but I would be remiss if I said that he has just been great at the tackle position. It has been tough. It's been tough. It really did. Aesthetic said, I personally think Coach O is a great guy. I'm worried, but been a Coach O fan for a few years. Look, I'm not speaking to Coach O, the person. I don't know him, and that would be out of pocket for me to speak about somebody's personhood. Right? I don't know him, and so I'm going to operate under the assumption that he is. Maybe he's a perfectly good guy. I don't know. I do know, though, that whenever you are put in a position where you're not giving adequate, what's the word I'm looking for? Whenever you're not giving adequate praise to the people around you, that's already a red flag. Then you look at some of the things that have come up about Ed O at his time at LSU. That's a red flag. The team marching without him, that's a red flag. And then you look at what he's supposed to do. He's a trenches guy, and they're getting spanked in the trenches. That to me is really bad. I would love to see Young and Caleb Williams in 2 years give experience. Yeah, I mean, goodness gracious, man. There are going to be some phenomenal quarterbacks coming about, and Bryce is going to be. Just think Bryce has next year as well. It could be great. Caleb Williams is someone I'm very excited to see for Oklahoma. Very talented coming out of high school. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. Noah says the nation does not want to watch a bloodbath. If Cincy gets in, it will be a blowout. You know, I think that there's definitely something to the argument, but the people, Noah, are going to counter your argument with, well, we don't know until we try. One of those where I think that it is another indication of two people having a valid opinion, but just two different sides of the same argument. Mike says that Bryce and the center need to work on the exchange. Absolutely. Absolutely. No doubt. That's what Georgia fan. Help me, JT Dan. You're my only hope. I love the Star Wars reference right there. I love it. Aesthetic says Cincy deserved it to be in over last year over Notre Dame. Everyone knew it. They were going to get blowed out in the first. Cincy would have get blowed out, but they deserved it more. And it's not like Notre Dame did anything intriguing anyways. I mean, in fairness, Notre Dame did play Alabama about as well as anybody played Alabama last year. I mean, if we're just being 100% fair, I'm not trying to assign moral victories. That's not what I do. That's not my style. Notre Dame did play Alabama better than most teams played Alabama. So there is that. There absolutely is that. Since he played a close game against Georgia last year, I mean, this is also true. Since he did look really good in that playoff game against Georgia, or playoff game, in the bowl game against Georgia, that is absolutely true. 100% true. Michael, the only thing I would say to that, though, is, man, a year makes a difference, even if it's the same team. And I'll put it like this. Iowa State finished the year pretty good, looking like a pretty good team. And this year, they return all that talent, and they look bad. So a year can make a lot of difference, even when maybe it shouldn't. That's just the beauty of college football. Absolutely is. So before we hop off of here, I'm going to just quickly preview some of the games for next week. We've already talked about the Red River rivalry. I'm really not going to spend too much more time on that. I mean, that game is what we completely expect it to be. I mean, everything's up in the air. It's going to be a beautiful mess. But there are some things I think we need to talk about as well, especially in the SEC. Right? We've talked about Alabama. We've talked about them playing A&M. I think they're going to beat A&M. A&M has talented, but that offensive line has been just bad, and I don't think that they're going to be able to contain Alabama's defensive front. I just don't. I pretended not to see it, Richard. I pretended it didn't happen. That was yeah, there's work to be done. Here's what I will say, though. It is good seeing them establish the running game and knowing that there's still a ways to go for this team to improve, right? When we think of Alabama right now and think about it with the mindset of they're this good right now and they're still improving, that's going to be a really tough team to beat. And I think they're going to beat A&M this weekend. I just don't think A&M can stop their pass rush. I just don't at all. Chicken says, I point about Coach O is very valid. Maybe I'm wrong, but he has gone shirtless, divorced, but he seems more selfish than team. Am I wrong, sweets? I don't know, man. Like it's very hard for me to talk about Coach O, but it's just, I never want to be anybody calling for someone else's job. That's not what I want to do. As many of you have probably realized at this point, I've never just flat out said it, right? I've never flat out said it. I don't cover things that I don't think are positive. And here's an example. Chicken, here's an example for you, right? When all that happened with OU over the offseason, with the criminal stuff, I didn't talk about it. And the reason is because there's nothing I can say that's going to make that situation any better. There's nothing I can provide you that is going to be something that you haven't heard that's going to improve the situation. I can't offer anything to it. Instead, I would rather focus instead of on the young men who made a terrible decision, who have impacted their future. I'd rather focus on the young man who's going to be getting more reps because of that, who now all of a sudden has a chance to go make a name for himself in the college football game to achieve his dreams that he's been working harder on. You know, I said in the beginning, I've gone through a lot in my life, and that's why I always try and focus on the positive. That's not to say I'm not going to be real, but I always try and focus on the positive because to me, that's why sports are so important. I think there's a lot of life lessons to be learned in sports and a lot of societal lessons to be learned in sports. I do. He said, I would love to see more of JoJo Earl. Dude's legit everything. He is so good, Richard. He's going to be great. I cannot wait for him to continue progressing. He's such a talented guy. I talked about at the beginning of this. I was at the Alito game. Got to see him get that pass in the state championship last year. He was caught dead to rights within 1 yard of getting that ball, and then boom, touchdown, 60 yards. I mean, he is electric. Absolutely electric. I mean, just JoJo Earl, I was so excited when he came. Sean says, I may be redundant in saying this, but you have a natural gift for media, plus the way, man, I appreciate it so much. It's just, I didn't think, you know, I guess in this closing seconds, because we've talked, I'll give like a little bit of a synopsis about me because, you know, that's, y'all have been so great. So I'll give you a quick synopsis about me. I did so on JP, Indy Sooners podcast. Great guy. I mean, what a guy. If you don't watch Indy Sooner, please do me that favor. Go subscribe to his channel. He's hardworking. He is a good guy. I mean, just a really solid dude. There's a lot of really solid dudes. I'll answer this and then I'll talk the closing things. You're familiar with Sark's offense. Do you think we will see all three running backs in the backfield? Oh, I think that y'all will be using a lot. I think y'all will be using a lot. I cannot wait to see how he ultimately gets Keelan Robinson mixed up in all of this. That guy has so much ability, so much versatility, and that's the name of the game, right? It's exactly why I always kept talking about Eric Gray when it related to Oklahoma, because versatility is king in college football right now. It absolutely is. Look at how running backs are being utilized. And Texas has got versatile running backs, man. Very versatile running backs. Very versatile running backs. Frightening says, you're going about this conversation all wrong. You should go for Bill O'Brien. I hear he's willing to give his best player away for a ham sandwich. No, this is college. This is not the NFL, and no player will be given away for half a ham sandwich. No. Not at all. Yeah, Indy Sooner's great, man. He's great. He's a really good dude. And Richard, yeah, man, it's people like you, man. Sincerely, I know people say this on YouTube, and it gets just kind of desensitized, but without y'all, this is nothing. That's the real thing here. Like, y'all have built something incredible. Y'all have built something incredible. And it's just, very humbling. So when I said that I'd give y'all kind of an insight to me. So coming out of university, I was all set for law school. I mean, it was pretty much, well, a done deal, but I'd known for quite some time that I didn't enjoy the legal field. I worked in law offices and, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I was very good. I was very good at that. I mean, behind me, there's that little cabinet like thing and you see the gavels. It's because I competed in undergraduate moot court in college, and I was top 10 in the nation in undergraduate oral legal advocacy my junior and senior year, ranking 5th individually in the nation in communication. I had lawyers talking to me at these tournaments. I mean, I had federal judges talking to me, offering me clerkships, wanting me to come work for them, trying to put me through law school, but I wasn't happy doing what I was doing. And everything culminated because I was very blessed to have just really blessed to have a great father. And my mom, awesome too, but my father was an individual who had graduated college and realized that what he was doing in life wasn't what made him happy. He was Cornell educated. He was a professor at the time, and he decided that he wanted to be a horse trainer. I know that's crazy, but he ended up, phone call. He ended up going from being a professor to going and training horses to the point where he got his, own ranch. He got all of that. And he always told me he did it because it made him happy. And so in 2018, he'd come to Denton, which is where I live right now. I'm in Denton, Texas, University of North Texas. He came to Denton a few days before Father's Day to see me because he was going to judge a horse show. And he and I went out to dinner, and he was actually killed on his way back. And that was something that always really stuck with me. And I blamed myself because I'd spent so much time in college pursuing all these different degrees where I could have graduated much earlier. And instead, I was still in Denton in college because I thought that if I got this degree and this degree and this degree, it would help me in my future. And so for years after that, and I know it's only 2021, it's been 3 years, but I held myself as the reason for that if I wasn't here, that he would still be here. And so at a certain point, I had to think to myself of what the best way to honor him would be. And I knew that all he would want in life is for me to do something that made me happy. And so being here, doing this, like having this channel and pursuing this, that's why this is so big. And that's why I actually said this has been like a therapy session, because I'd always struggled with depression up to that point. But then when you're at a point and you're already questioning if everything you've built your young adult life towards, being in the legal field, isn't what you want to do, and then you lose your dad. And I don't have any family in the state of Texas. It was just me, my mom, and my dad. And, my mom's moved back to Virginia because I have my brother and my sister there, and she's better off being with the grandkids. And so it's just me here. And so, that right there creates this uncertainty. But the one thing that has just been unbelievable is coming here and talking with y'all. And it's almost just like a therapy session for me, because this is what I want to do. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to establish a career in this, but just being able to do this has been unbelievable. And so, some people have said, oh, you have great communication skills. It's because I was trained. Very honestly, I was almost militantly trained in legal advocacy, and I was very good at it. Ranked 5th in the nation my senior year. That's just what I did. So it's I know I have a lot more work to do, but that's why I think I've always wanted to be more open and forthright because of what y'all have given me. And I know it might seem meaningless just watching a video or subscribing or liking, but what that does and what that gives me, it's really unbelievable. And that's why I talk at times about the community that y'all have created, because I didn't do anything. I talked about sports, and you guys did that. You guys did this community where we have Texas fans talking with OU fans, talking with Alabama fans, and we're having a good time. And that's what this is all about. That's what all of this is about. And so I cannot thank you all enough. I mean, like Richard, your comment is still here. I remember when you sub 27, because as soon as I graduated, I didn't know what I was going to do with my life because I didn't want to go to law school. It made me deeply unhappy, very deeply unhappy. And there was a case I had where I can't talk about it, but I can only say that to this day, I have dreams of that case, and it really affected me negatively. And so coming here was just therapy. And I remember, man, like I remember the people who've been here from the beginning, because that's been huge for me. Thank you, Sean. There's nothing else to do, man. Like, you just got to do what you got to do. And, like, I have to be real. I don't know if this is going to be able to turn into a career, but I'm working my hardest to do it. That's why this year alone, I've put out 300 plus videos. I try and talk about different teams because I just, I want to be able to highlight why sports are important, right? Because the legal world, what I found is there's very few issuances of hope. And yeah, like I always realized it. I can go and do law and I can try and help somebody. But when I was working at the personal injury law firm, I realized my help can only affect you monetarily. I can't bring back that person you just lost because that's what I experienced. There's nothing in the world that could bring back somebody. And instead of that, I would rather work in a field where, especially recruiting, which is why I love recruiting so much, these kids, they work their ass off, man, to get these opportunities. And when they get them, I think it needs to be highlighted. Because we all, in life, there's a lot of ups and downs, but the issuances of where we have the opportunity to give credit to individuals who are working hard and pursuing their dreams are something that need to be highlighted, because that's what keeps people going. That's what creates hope. And that's exactly what this country is built off of. Now you're getting the history nerd in me that studied American history, constitutional history. Like, that's just what this is. And so that's why I focus specifically on the positive aspects of this. Because in the hometown I came from, I think, Chicken, weren't you saying you worked in Thackerville? You know Gainesville. There's not a lot of money in Gainesville. There's not a lot of hope in Gainesville. I can promise you this, man. And I know that sometimes people might say, oh, it's just sports. It's not just sports. It's not. It's not. And that's why maybe sometimes people disagree with me, because I look into this deeper. When my friends got a college scholarship to go play football, the amount of hope that gave that town was unbelievable. I mean, you had kids the next year actually believing that there was a way out. I graduated with 150 kids, and there were a handful of kids that ended up going on to college or do something. Most of my friends are still in Gainesville, because that's what Gainesville is. It's a cogwheel. And it's the same thing year after year, no matter how you try and change it. But sports offered the ability for a positive change. That's why this isn't just football. This isn't just football. I mean, every kid on a college roster is a kid who got an opportunity to go to college. They get an opportunity to better their lives, their families' lives, and their future families' lives, as well as the lives that they've impacted without ever even knowing it. The lives of their teammates, who now they have a belief that they can go and do something, whether that's football or not. It translates, and hope translates. And that's why this is so important to me. That's why this is so important to me. And that's why I want to highlight. And ultimately, the intersectionality of sports, law, culture, I think it's all unbelievably important. That's why I want to highlight all of this. Right. And that's kind of where I'll leave this now. I appreciate everybody coming in here. I really can't voice my appreciation enough. Sometimes I'm hard on myself, and I think that this is, I'm not going anywhere, and that I'm not going to be able to break into this career. But then I have to remind myself that this is really my first year covering college football. I was in an internship last year, so it's really been January to now really heavy. And in that year, I mean, we're almost at 7,500 subscribers. Hopefully we'll hit 10,000 this year. I passed 1.2 million views in 2021. And that's because of y'all. And that's why I can say thank you and thank you and thank you. And it just sounds like words, but y'all are making something that I've worked towards a reality. And that's why I cannot thank you enough. I will be doing another live stream this week. I'm going to be having more guests on, especially because it's Red River Rivalry. I'm not for sure that he's going to be able to come on, but I will say Texas Homer is an individual that looks like he's going to be coming on. I'm going to be trying to get JP, a lot of the guys, Chris Griffin with the Horns Down podcast. I'm going to be trying to get Fanatic's perspective. These guys do great work, and I think it'd be a lot of fun for us to do a big group stream with all of you, with all of our, fan bases, and just have a really good time. So, with that, just thank y'all so much for coming in. I'll be I'll be streaming again Friday, and if I do another live stream, I might do 3 this week. I'll let you know. So thank y'all. Y'all have a good evening. Go enjoy Monday Night Football. Go be with your family. And at the end of the day, just remember, man, it's all about adaptability and being able to keep on going. And there's everything that, if you think you can make a positive difference in life, try and do it. And whether I'm able to do that or not, I don't know, but that's the ultimate goal here. Richard, I can't thank you enough for the $10, man. I absolutely will take her out. She deserves the world. I mean, she's a teacher and she has been my #1 fan from the beginning. So I really appreciate it. Y'all enjoy y'all's evening. I'll be back once again tomorrow. I'll have a video. We'll be having more live streams this week. So we're going to have a ton of fun this week. So thank y'all so much for tuning into the live stream. It was an awesome time as always. For those of you that may not know, I do a live stream every Monday night that will be consistent from here on out, no matter what happens. That's here to stay. Monday night live streams, and it's only going to keep getting better. So thank y'all for tuning in. It's been really awesome. That's it. See ya.